but she was always losing or not doing well against the big three. It was Kramnik, Kasparov, and Anand. And her results were just not that great, and frankly, were poor. And I said to her, we were having a conversation in New York City when she was visiting. I said, what do you have to do to get to the next level so you can beat those guys? And she paused for a second. She said, first of all, you mean levels. And that extra S blew my mind. When you start meditating, you realize it's extremely hard to not think about the thing you're not supposed to be thinking about. But the thing was to give yourself grace. And what that meant was that if something came in your mind and you realize, why am I thinking about that? To not feel like, oh, you're such an idiot for thinking about that. Because that's what the mind does. The mind just starts wandering.
Welcome back, chess fans, to another episode of the C Squared podcast. Today we have a very special guest once again for round two with us, the one and only Grandmaster Maurice Ashley. Maurice is not only a renowned chess grandmaster, but also a brilliant commentator that we all miss so much on the circuit, and an educator, as well as more recently a celebrated author. So Maurice, welcome back to the pod.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's always good to be with you fellas. And yeah, I miss you guys.
We definitely do as well. Tell us a bit about what you've been doing. I mean, the last time we chatted was in St. Louis, just before, I believe, Fabi won the US Championship. Is that correct, Fabi?
The last time,
yeah, I think that's right.
Off the record, or because we did the podcast in 2022, right?
Yes.
Last time, but we've seen each other in between that.
We have
quite a few times.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. How's life? How's life treating you, Maurice?
Life is good, man. I can't complain. You know, I made this big decision to stop doing commentary and go in a different direction in my life, and so it's mainly been about content creation. So I've done a bunch of chessable videos. I'm actually going to be doing 3 more quite soon in Barcelona. And I wrote a couple of books. I actually wrote 3 books. 2 of them got published. The other one is now being illustrated because it's going to be a graphic novel. And so that one's not coming out for a couple of years, actually, because it just takes a long time for this process to work. Doing corporate speeches. I just did my first commencement speech, which was really cool.
That's exciting.
To graduates at Western Governors University. That was fun. That was just, check on the bucket list. So yeah, I've been busy, definitely.
Was that difficult for you? The commencement speech? Always, whenever you do something for the first time, it's you get the butterflies, I guess. Did you get those?
I definitely had butterflies with this one. Big audience like that, all those graduates. You want to say some inspiring words, get them all psyched up. But I definitely had a nice story talking about my mother and her journey and how she impacted us, her 3 children. And I hear people responded very well, maybe even had some tears in the house. So I feel like I did a good job.
That's not bad. Fabi?
Yeah, I'm actually curious because you're so experienced in terms of speaking, both in a commentary role, but also in terms of giving speeches or addressing a large group of people or perhaps educating people on chess. And like for me, it's terrifying. It's not even that I'm like terrible at it necessarily. I don't really know, but I'm just terrified of it. But so I'm curious if you still feel that, like, I don't know if fear is the right word, but that apprehension or anticipation coming into like giving a speech, or at this point it's just like normal routine and you kind of have it down and all that.
Well, I mean, usually if I'm in front of a camera, it's super easy, right? Like you just talk and you don't really see a bunch of people necessarily. But whenever there's an audience, whenever there's a big live audience, it's different because you can actually gauge their reaction to what you're saying because they're just right there. And even though I've done it many times, the audiences vary. And in this case, it's a graduating class. You're trying to say things that they're going to remember, they're going to walk away from feeling inspired, and you don't want to lay an egg. And so, I had the speech carefully written out. We had the teleprompters. The other thing that I had too was I had the robe on, like like the robe and the tam. So I had that look like almost like a PhD, professor or dean or something. I'd never done that before, so that was pretty cool. Getting the get up and doing the speech from the stage. And so yeah, I definitely had a few butterflies going in. I really wanted to nail this one, and I actually gave two speeches on the same day to two different graduating classes from the same university. So the first one was a little bit of butterflies. The second one, I pretty much was like, okay, I got it done. I'm in this, so I felt okay.
That's actually quite interesting that you say that. Does the size of the audience matters? And after that, I will ask you about the camera as well, because you've been kind of in the commentary role that I've been doing for by now 8 years. You kind of have been a mentor, yeah. And I've been following in the footsteps. But I have to say, for me, the butterflies are still there, not as intense as they were in the first few years. The first few years, I have to say, they were terrifying. But like year 7, year 8, and now I'm starting to kind of develop that pure confidence that everything is going to be all right. You know what I mean?
This is the thing. We're so concerned about ourselves, but the audience wants you to do well. Yeah. I think that's the most important thing to understand. The audience has shown up and they want you to do well. They are supportive. They're not hypercritical of everything you're going to say, at least the majority of the people who are there. There are some people who they're just going to hate, and there's nothing you can do about those people. But the majority of people who are there, they think you're the professional, you know your stuff, and if you do, just be yourself. And that's really that's all you can ever do. That's where the secret to handling pressure is you can't be better than yourself. It's who you are that day that's shown up to express your ideas, your thoughts, your preparation. And if you've done that, the rest is just straightforward. You just have to talk. And I think that, obviously you're a great commentator. Fabi, you're fantastic on camera, even though you're not trying to do anything extra, especially because you're not trying to do anything extra, you're just being yourself. And I think that's really the secret. You just be you. And then people will engage. Some people won't like your style. Again, nothing to do about that. But the vast majority of folks are there listening to you and wanting you to do well and hoping that they'll be enlightened because they're really concerned about themselves. They want to get some information themselves. So I think that's the real secret whenever we're in those kind of settings, is to recognize that the audience is supportive and they just want to take a nugget or two away that they can maybe use to help benefit their lives.
And one of the challenging things I found with commentary, and of course I'm not as experienced as you are by far, or as you are, Christian, but I have done a little bit. And one of the things I found really challenging is that I feel like if I'm going to speak in the way that, like, let's say we're having a conversation, I speak in this sort of manner, then it won't be enthusiastic enough. But I also don't want to ham it up to the point that I'm either saying meaningless words just to get more words in, or being overly not enthusiastic, but overly, like hyping it up a bit too much to the point that it feels artificial. And I've noticed a tendency to just, like, if I don't know exactly where my thought process is, to just start saying words, which later I'm like, what am I saying? These words have no meaning whatsoever. So that there is that, like, really fine balance, at least that I found. Maybe for you it feels more natural after so much experience and so much time as a presenter.
I think it does get much easier over time, but only when you become comfortable again with the fact that you are just going to say things that are okay. And in your case, I mean, you're one of the best players on the planet. I mean, number 2 on the planet. So people basically are ready to listen to anything you have to say. You're as authoritative as they come. And you're also not pretentious in any way. You're just speaking your mind, and your mind is pretty damn good. So whatever you say, it just comes across. And I think even, like, you can leave the hype to people like myself, because you don't have to hype anything. You just are yourself. You just talk, and people are going to be hanging on every word you have to say.
And actually, that kind of ties out to the next question that I had, and kind of to open up the conversation about the new book that you have behind you, Move by Move. Tell us a bit about that, and then you also wrote, there's a chapter in the book about endless learning. And I think this is something that Fabi is trying to kind of say as well, that, as a commentator, you're always looking to fine tune whatever, the way you communicate, right? And tell us a bit about that aspect of your profession and how do you deal with that endless learning?
Well, first, the book itself, it's kind of funny, the story behind the book, because it's a book that I didn't plan to write at first. In fact, the book was offered to me by the publisher, Chronicle, as a book they wanted to have, which was a book on the wild and wacky world of chess. So they wanted funny stories, they wanted crazy personalities. We've got enough of that in the chess world. And they wanted me to write that book, and they said, it's a nice book where people can open up any page and just dip in and read some chapter or some nugget about the chess world. So I thought I could write that book. But as I tried to write the book, it simply refused to be written. It was just like, nope, not going to be written. This is not what you want to write about. And honestly, I missed a couple of deadlines being busy and trying to do this book. I had an outline all set, thought I could do it. But eventually, the editor looked at me and said, okay, you're clearly having trouble writing this book. What's going on? And I said, I feel like I don't want to write this book. It just refuses to be written. And she said, okay, what book do you want to write? And that just reframed everything. And the one that I really had in me was a book about the lessons that chess taught me over the years. So the lessons that I've gleaned from chess, my years playing, the thoughts I've had about it, how it impacted me as a person, and the kind of things I felt would be beneficial to other people that could show them just what the power of chess is. And so that's what the book is all about. The chapter you're talking about, Levels of Endless Learning, that's related to something, a story I tell about a conversation I had with Judith Polgar. And this was when she was number 8 in the world. She was obviously one of the top 10 players, but she was always losing or not doing well against the big three. It was Kramnik, Kasparov, and Anand. And her results were just not that great, and frankly were poor. And I said to her, we were having a conversation in New York City when she was visiting. I said, what do you have to do to get to the next level so you can beat those guys? And she paused for a second. She said, first of all, you mean levels. And that extra S blew my mind. I was clearly not on her level or anywhere near for me to appreciate that she understood that there was a big gap between her at number 8 and them at numbers 1, 2, and 3. And, that gave me the idea, like, wow, first of all, I'm nothing. That's clear. And I don't understand that level or levels, but that it's a story that never ends. You're always learning more about chess. It's just so vast. We don't know 1% of chess. People are blown, their minds are blown when I tell people that I'm an advanced beginner. I know so little about the game. There are people who know much better than I do. And even those people are really objectively not that good because the computer spanks all of us. So there's just more and more to learn. And we have to accept the fact that we're on a ladder that keeps getting higher.
Yeah, and from an educator point of view, you don't have that blind spot. But when you're in the heat of the battle, sometimes when you're a competitor, sometimes there is that blind spot. You don't know what is the next level. As an educator, as a coach, for example, it's much easier to spot those blind spots. Do you have any strategies to know what the next level is, to know what needs to be taken care of in this process? I think the bottom line is humility and continue to work. I don't think you worry about the next level. My question itself was a bad question. What you do is you just keep working and keep plugging away and keep exploring your weaknesses and just getting better and better and more knowledgeable. And soon the next level will arrive. I think we all went through all those levels when we were trying to get better and get to the grandmaster level. It's just the work. You put in the work. A lot of people worry about rating. The fixation with rating is like one of the worst fixations in all of chess. Like, it's just horrible because people are always, how do I get my rating up? What do I need to do to get from 2,000 to 2,100?
from 2100 to 2200. Like, you know what you need to do? Stop caring about rating and do the work.
That's impossible, Maurice. We're chess players. We care about rating.
Look, you can care all you want. Nothing's going to change unless you do the work. Nothing's going to change unless you do the work. Pure and simple. You can try to jimmy your rating, trick your way into a higher rating. You win a game and your rating goes up, and then you lose, your rating goes down. What does that mean? It means nothing. Nothing's going to change unless you do the work. You cannot just become a GM. It's just like, oh, I'm just going to jimmy it. No, you have to be a GM. You have to be a GM to become a GM. That's actually one of the chapters in my book as well. You cannot become anything unless you're already that thing, right? You're not going to attain this level. You're just going to walk in and somehow, as you're in the middle of the game, you're going to these games, you're going to magically become that level. No, that's not what happens. What happens is you put in all the work beforehand, you train beforehand, you lose all those games beforehand, you inspect all your mistakes beforehand, you study, you get tougher, you think about the things that you do wrong and all the things you do right, you refine your entire process. And at some point along the journey, the level shift happens. And it might take 6 months, it might take a year, it might take a year and a half, but it's not going to happen in the middle of the game. It's going to happen because of all the work you put in beforehand. And so fixating on your rating, if you're actually a 2200, it's because you did all the work. It'll show in your games. If you're actually 2500, you're actually 2800, all that's going to show after you've already done the work that gets you to that level.
On the other hand, I think that the goals are helpful to us. It's just human nature that if I were to tell you to work on chess, but you'll never play a single game of chess in your life, then you'd say, what's the point? But if I told you that your goal is to reach this certain point, if you have like a clear goal in mind, then you focus on the work and you know I'll put the work in and then I'll achieve my goal, whether your goal is to win a tournament or to become a certain level. I think that you're absolutely correct that people fixate too much on ratings and then they're scared that they'll lose their rating and they sabotage themselves by trying to like keep their rating and not thinking about the larger picture, as you mentioned, of improving. But if you have a series of goals and then you take them step by step and you work towards them, I think that can be a very, very helpful thing for everyone. I'm just thinking back on my own experience, my own chess career, and how goals have pushed me forward and how lack of motivation has also at times kept me back.
I agree with you 100%. I think goals are extremely important. That's a difference. It's a difference between having a goal and fixating on your rating, right? Your goal can be this thing that you are working towards, but you're working towards it without trying to fixate too much on the intermediate steps or the steps along the way that are these benchmarks when you talk about your rating, right? Oh, if I want to be a 2200, first I have to be a 2125, and then I'm going to be a 2150, and then I'm going to be a 2175. Oh no, I dropped down again. Oh no, I got to work and pull it back up. No, your goal is the big goal that you want to focus on, and whatever. Even as you talk about the incremental steps along the way, as you have maybe an even ultimate goal, but that goal doesn't mean that in order to attain that goal, you still have to put in all the work to get there. And that's really the bottom line. It's the work you have to put in to get there. So you should have goals. We're humans. We are motivated by those goals, but you shouldn't fixate on things like ratings and those kind of numbers because it will come. The goal will come if you put in the work.
At the same time, it's almost like a very specific mindset that not a lot of people actually have. This mindset of continuous growth. Do you have any, let's say, strategies to develop that mindset?
I think the elucidation of the idea is the key thing, right? You can approach anything. You could understand from your life experience that growth is a continuous process, right? Growth is a continuous process. We are aging. We age each day. We don't suddenly, although in some cases the jump happens, like when you make grow 5 inches over the summer, right? Like something like that. But mainly you're growing each and every day. And it's a slow and sometimes invisible process, but it ends up happening, right? We see it all around us. The entire world reflects this concept of slow but steady growth, which is at some point accelerated or punctuated by a sudden giant leap forward. And for me, those leaps are important. I mean, that's, one day I can't beat my friend at chess. I keep doing the work. He's still crushing me. And then one day I wake up and he has no chance, right? Like it wasn't, I got incrementally closer. I just couldn't beat him. And then now he just has no chance. And that's happened to me enough times for me to understand that growth process, that growth is basically the plateau for a while, doing all the work you can. And then suddenly you jump and you're at another level. I'm sure you two have gone through the same thing at different points as well. Like this idea of explosive growth, but only after you've been stuck maybe at a level for some time, or maybe just improving only slightly. But the world you just look at outside and you see everything in the world grows that same way.
Fabi, can you remember any of those episodes where you experienced that?
I was thinking about it, from personal experience. And I think that this is probably something that many people can relate to, is that a lot of improvement and self-belief are tied together. So you mentioned like you're losing to your friend all the time, and then suddenly you beat your friend the one time, and now it seems easy. And now it's very competitive where you're starting to beat your friend all the time. And I think part of it is that you improve to the point where you're capable of beating your friend. And then once you get that first taste of it, then you have the self-belief that it can happen in the future. And that in itself also makes you stronger. I think that like the psychology and the improvement, like they really come together. And it's probably a mistake to think that psychology doesn't play a part at all in improvement, which I'm sure, most people understand that, especially if they're going through this process and let's say they have a big tournament victory and then suddenly it makes them stronger for the next one. They have this maybe organic understanding that belief and confidence also play a huge role in that. And I can also speak from experience that, and I'm sure we all can, that once you have a big success, it kind of propels you forward in the future and makes you realize, oh, now I can actually do this. I can beat an 1800, or I can beat a grandmaster, or whatever it is, and that kind of helps you improve in the future as well.
Yeah, and it's always the case when you've been growing and growing, and then you hit that plateau, and that can be disheartening at times. If you stay stuck for like 1-2 years. I remember when I went from 2200 to almost 2400 in one month, one rating list basically. And then I got stuck there for like 2 years. And actually I went back to 2270 and I was like, what's happening, right? Why am I not making any improvements? And then suddenly I got back to 2400. And then I had, in the span of a couple of months, I had this huge success at the World Youth Championship. And then immediately I went and did my GM norms. And I had no idea that I have it in me. I was at 2270. Just 6 months before. I was like, what's happening? Was that just a fluke? Was my first 2400 rise just a fluke? And you have all these questions and whatnot, but you just have to keep on drilling and keep on adding skills to your arsenal, I guess.
Yeah, I think that jump is amazing. I went through a growth period from 1800 to 2400 in a 3-year time span. And it was hard to even understand. Like I was just boom, 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 just jump. And then when I got to 2400, like I hit a brick wall. You think you're going to be linear growth like this forever, and reality kicks in, and it's just not the case. And the only thing you can do is go back to doing the work. And this was my level, and I just kept working at it. And you get stuck on the plateau. There's a great book called Mastery by George Leonard. One of my favorite books that I read along the process, and remains one of my favorite books now. And he was an Aikido guy, but he understood this process of being stuck at the plateau and people wanting to somehow hack growth. We hear that all the time in society. You're gonna hack growth. We're gonna do something really fast. Whenever I hear that, I'm like, don't waste your time. Like that's just a complete waste, because growth is not that it's not hackable, so to speak, but really the hack is put in the work, fool. Like just keep doing what is known to be effective, and sooner or later everything will come together in your mind and then in your performance. And that just takes time. And also, by the way, knowledge is only part of the battle, right? You talked about psychology, Fabi. Knowledge is great. You could know a lot, but when you're sitting across the board and your opponent is staring at you, and you know this is for all the marbles, and the tension builds, and you're in the fifth hour, and your hand starts to shake, and your stomach starts to growl because you're hungry, and you know that this is it. Congratulations that you have all that knowledge. How are you performing with that knowledge? And that has to come together too in competition. And a lot of people get derailed right at that point because they don't have the nervous system to be able to tolerate the kind of tension you need as a grandmaster or as a warrior, professional warrior, when you're fighting another professional warrior. So all that has to combine. There's no substitute for experience and for being just in the fire.
Yeah, I think maybe this is a bit controversial, but I think that it's I fully agree that knowledge is not the biggest thing, and I would even say not really an important thing. Like when I think of, let's say, the vast majority of players, what might be holding them back, it's not that they don't know enough theory, certainly not even close. And it's not even that they haven't studied enough middle games and they don't know the plan, although that's very useful to have like good pattern recognition. And I've seen a lot of the patterns and being able to implement that kind of not subconsciously, but on a more intuitive level. That's important, but it's really like, I would say, a very minor part. And the work is not just to like improve your intuition, but it's also, I think, to kind of turn your brain on constantly. So it's always thinking about chess. And once you have that process where your brain is just always thinking, like, let's say I tell you a series of moves in the opening, and then you just start to like picture the position in your head, and you're calculating the position that I just told you. That would be an example, I would say, of like you're turned on in terms of you're activated, or however you want to say it, that your mind is kind of tuned to thinking about chess. And that's what will help someone most during a game. So the work, of course, it's very important for knowledge, for pattern recognition, for all that, but it's more just to get you in the mode to be calculating, to be thinking about chess, to be playing. And I think that's where like rust comes in. It's not because you don't know the latest like theory developments. It's because you haven't thought about chess for a long time. And that's when someone says they're rusty, that's probably what they're talking about. Not that, I haven't checked my openings and I feel like I'm on the back foot in the opening. That's probably not going to be the biggest problem for most people. So yeah, knowledge it plays a part, but it's really not the biggest part. And just like the work that you put in, just the fact that you're working, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be on something useful necessarily. Just the fact that you're working on chess is the important part, I think, at least.
I love that thought that it doesn't even have to be something useful. I remember I used to study with my buddy Josh Waitzkin, and we'd get to some position that was fascinating to me. Like, this position is so interesting, and it had nothing to do with the theory we would play. We just got sidetracked. I was like, this position is interesting. Let's look at it. And he's like, yo, this is not practical at all. We're never going to see this position. I said, yeah, but this position is so much fun and it's so intriguing. Let's just see what the truth is. And he would be pissed off. Like, okay, fine, whatever. And we'd be analyzing it. And again, no utility, right? No useful value at all as far as a theoretical possibility that might happen in a game. And it's only recently that he said, I was visiting with him, and he said, I got to apologize for something, which I had completely forgotten. He said, you used to force us to look at these useless positions, and I used to push back. But recently, I realized that this is an important part of the learning process. And so, yeah, you were right. I was like, wow, I mean, I hadn't thought about it in a long time, but well, you just said it right there. Like, it's just about your brain being engaged, looking at chess, seeing how things function, even fantasy chess in that way, right? Like just crazy positions. As long as you are hungry and you're curious, maybe curiosity is the best word, then all that stuff will be beneficial in some way. You're filing something away in your mind about some kind of operation, and it may not work in the opening you're looking at, but there'll be somewhere, somehow, that it will manifest itself in some games of yours in the future.
And I feel this is the aspect of play, right? In the learning process. You have to play, you have to get engaged. It just simply activates a certain part of your brain, because otherwise, if you don't engage in this play mode, let's say, whenever you're learning, maybe on occasion, maybe sometimes you have to be really serious about it, you have to drill down on certain topics, but you definitely need to find time for play as well. And I feel like this is part of the reason why sometimes people just simply don't improve. They get stuck, and then they reach burnout, and that's a problem, right? If you engage in play, and if you find the right person, the right people, the right community to do that with, I feel that can definitely help you with the improvement process.
I mean, play is so critical. Like, think about, how do you respond to pressure, right? How do you respond to the circumstances like I talked about? We all have been there. I don't mean to bring this up, Fabi, but you just had a recent experience in a hugely important game where you were winning, and a win would have given you a tiebreak possibility. And it's not like the way you should have won that game is stuff you don't know, right? It's like, that stuff. Nobody tells you should have, just taken the pawn on H2. That's not about what you know and knowledge and somebody's teaching you anything. It's about how you responded under pressure, in a critical situation, in a critical moment, in a game, and in your life. And without going through that experience, nobody really knows what that feels like. I don't know what that feels like at all, to play at that level of importance in a game, and what happens to your brain in that moment, the kind of clarity that you have. And that's something that obviously was painful for you, but it's something that you have to explore within yourself to understand what happened and how you can improve from it the next time, which will happen. You will have other opportunities as the level you are when it happens again, right? And that only happens when you actually are in the cauldron, right? You're in the fire. That pot's boiling, and only few people will ever understand how hot that pot, what it feels like to be in that boiling pot, and then to feel it inside yourself so you can be successful. Really assess that so you can be successful next time.
Yeah, I think if you look at the mistakes that you see between strong players on, let's say, at the grandmaster level and up, like very, very strong players, the mistakes that people make are not mistakes that they don't understand, are mistakes. Like, if you show them after the fact, or if you show them this as something that someone else did, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's an obvious mistake. In the vast majority of cases, of course, there are some cases where you make a mistake that is beyond comprehension. But they're very rare. They're exceedingly rare. If you look at the candidates, which is the highest level, the best players in the world, the mistakes that they make, I include myself and also the other players, are almost always mistakes that even players of a much lesser caliber would have ease understanding if you showed them these moves are being made. Of course, these are mistakes. Like, if you look at Pragnanta's game against Nepomniachtchi, how he missed a very big winning opportunity. If you look at my game that I lost to Hikaru, not to mention the last game against Jan, but also how I lost to Hikaru, making mistakes that, of course, I understand after the fact that they're mistakes. I don't understand during the game, but it's not because it's out of my capability of understanding. It's that, as you mentioned, you're in the fire. You're playing in real time. You're making decisions in real time. It's not with the benefit of hindsight. It's not with the benefit of being able to dissect every decision, and also without knowing how much time you can expend on every decision. And so that's why chess is like 99% a practical game. It's not about your theoretical knowledge. You can take the most knowledgeable people on chess. They're going to be the guys who've been playing chess the longest, right? It's going to be, let's say, a guy like a 90-year-old grandmaster can't play anymore. Absolutely, but knows everything you could possibly want to know about the game, and but it's really all about the practical strength. It's again not so much about knowledge. Like, let's say my knowledge has increased so much in the last 10 years in terms of chess. Like, I know so much more than 10 years ago. My rating is more or less around the same. My world ranking is pretty much around the same if you go back 10 years. So why am I not massively stronger? Well, it's because I got stronger in some ways. I got more knowledge, but I also got weaker in some ways. There's like a trade-off. And some, if I compare myself to like when I was 18, definitely I had some more practical skills when I was 18 than now. And if we look at the young guys who are competing, and you wonder, like, why are they competing with the best players, the kind of old guard, the best players of the previous 10 years? It's because, yeah, they might lack some knowledge and experience, but they have these practical skills and this determination and all those other things. So it's not really so much about knowledge. It's about a huge amount of factors.
Would you say they also have a different way of looking at chess, a different way of approaching chess? For example, I'm thinking about the game between Hikaru and Gukesh from the last round, where Hikaru said that he didn't even consider on the spot those ideas of b4, for example. He missed the move rook to d1, which would have stopped b4 on the spot, but he missed that idea. He's never seen that idea. Do you feel like the new generation is looking at chess in a different way? And that question goes to you as well, Maurice.
Well, I guess Bobby should answer that first.
I need to think about it a bit. So
go ahead, Maurice.
Go first.
You go with the fresh thoughts, because you've been. We haven't asked you anything about the candidates. You have the fresh thoughts. How do you see this?
Well, I mean, I do think that this generation that each generation thinks about chess differently, right? So if you go back, obviously I'm older than you guys by a lot. You go back into the previous century, we were very concerned and had very much of a big belief on the best move, that every position had a best move. And you were trained to find that best move. But I mean, every position. There's something you're looking for that about this position that is some kind of objective truth that has the best move. And I write about this actually in my book. It's in the chapter, It's a Complex Universe. There's an argument by John von Neumann that chess is not really like life, because with chess, there's always, theoretically at least, a best move. And that's what we believed in. But what happened? Engines showed up. And engines started saying, yeah, there's obviously a lot of situations where like mate in two, and there's no other mate in two. So you can call that the best move. But there are also a giant class of situations where it's not a single best move. There will be maybe three moves that are exactly the same, essentially the same evaluation. And you have to make a choice about which path you will take based on these three different moves. And so it's not about the best move, it's the best move for you, or it's the best move against this particular opponent. And so the next generation, I think, understood that, or has understood that much better than the previous generation, who's still looking for the best moves, while the next generation is like, maybe this or maybe that. And that's that engine influence. But somebody like yourselves at your age, you're sort of bridging the gap almost between that previous best move generation and the engine evaluation. But this generation, the younger generation, the 18-year-olds, they're post Deep Blue. They're post 1997 by even a lot. A significant amount of teenagers for
Which
sure.
Which is kind of crazy.
And I know it sounds insane, but they grew up without any, in their minds, any inkling that engines were once worse than humans. Like it's not even relevant. There's no point. Who cares, right? To them, they grew up on this thing, and it's the thing that feeds them, that has been feeding them from when they first started playing chess. And so they'll always go back and quote the engine, and they'll always, the engine says, and it won't be a thing like an older generation be like, no, let's not talk about the engine. Let's find out what the human thinks. So they don't have this artifice. This doesn't impact them in any way. It doesn't make their egos feel any more fragile, and they look at chess differently. And I think that's going to keep happening, and we're seeing that change in this generation. They're much more cold-blooded. Before somebody sacked a pawn, you might not take it. They have comp. Nowadays, it's like, really? I don't know if that's comp. It looks like you might just be losing a pawn because I'm going to defend this position. So chess changes. Chess evolves over time.
At the same time, for example, Gukesh, he's kind of well known to not have used engines all the way until he was maybe 14, 15 years of age. So he's, let's say, educated in a way that the older generation has been educated up to a certain point, and then he was able to pick up the new skills that the engine confers. And it's quite cool to see that, because I just came back from Poland, where we had the Grand Chess Tour Rapid and Blitz, and Gukesh was a part of it as well. There is still a very different level when it comes to his handling of a classical chess game versus a rapid and blitz chess game. And I'm still trying to kind of wrap my head around why that is the case, but I feel it's because he was classically trained. He was probably asked by his coaches to sit and think and find the best move. Sit and think for like 10-15 minutes. Rapid and blitz, obviously, it's much more about intuition, and you need some time to develop that intuition. And I think that's probably where he's going to be working in the next few years on this part of his game.
Yeah, it's interesting. Fabi, how do you feel as a competitor? Like, you talked about this thing, which I find mind-blowing. You know that much more about chess, yet you still have the same rating. And you're still the same ranking in the world. Is it because everybody else has grown? Is it, you talk about the kids having practical skills? I mean, you're 33 now?
I'm 31.
31. Okay, so
he's not that old.
So you're not, it's like, you make it sound like you're going out to pasture with these little kids who are coming along.
I'm 33. So maybe that's...
you're the old guy.
I'm the old guy, yes.
Well, it's interesting because of course, now we've kind of seen the young guys more or less catch up. So if you talk about, let's say, Noterbeck or Wesley, yeah, they're very similar ratings. And you probably wouldn't consider one of them stronger than the other, right? Very equivalent players, right? You can go down a list and you'll see a mix of the, let's say, my generation, who are all in their 30s now, and the young generation, who are some in their teenage years, some around 20 or so, like Ali Reza, for example, who's already kind of seasoned, we could say. He's already been to 2 candidates, and everyone knows that he's been 2,800 or was 2,800 even 2 years ago or 3 years ago, whatever it's been. So yeah, now we see a mix, and I think we can kind of talk more about the different styles. And that's why, like, I don't know if it makes sense to focus on one particular player, because everyone has their own style. So Gukesh had an amazing candidate. He showed incredible stability, more than anyone else. He had only one real weak moment against Ali Reza. And it is perhaps true that his style is uniquely suited for classical. That there was a time when people thought this about me as well, that, okay, I wasn't as good when I got low on time, but I was quite strong in classical. And I think like a part of that, especially when it comes to blitz, is that a lot of the results in blitz really come down to final seconds. So if you're like perhaps a bit panicky when you come down to seconds, as I sometimes tend to be, that can really negatively impact your results. And you have to find some like way to deal with that, because you don't want to just be blundering games away that you were doing great. And I saw this in some of Gukesh's blitz games. He's doing great. He has a great position, comes down to seconds, and things fall apart. And this doesn't happen to, let's say, Magnus or, well, it happens to everyone sometimes, but it happens less to, let's say, Magnus, to Hikaru. I would say those are the guys who, they get down to seconds, you really see that they're maximizing their chances very often. So, and you take a player like Noterbeck, he seems to excel in this kind of like messy situations that naturally arise from Blitz and Rapid, sometimes also from classical games, but more so from Blitz and Rapid games, right? Just like complete mess, and somehow someone comes on top, and very often it's him. So everyone has their stylistic differences. From my generation, absolutely. I have definitely a very different style compared to Magnus, and compared to Wesley and other players. Everyone has their differences, right? So if we're talking about like as a whole, I think the interesting thing, and you mentioned this, I think it was very important when you mentioned like the pre-computer generation and their philosophy was totally different. And I think we're going to see less differences between the let's say my generation, like the 30-year-olds and the newer generation, because we already have that exposure to the computer. So we kind of have that similarity, which is that we weren't exactly taught by computers in the same way that these young guys were. I still do remember days when, it was you turn on an engine and it says complete nonsense because it says like, okay, E4, C5, white's winning. And like from my childhood, you just can't rely on the engines. But they were still there. And for a large portion of my career, most of my career, they were stronger than humans. Actually, the vast majority of my career, they were stronger. I think like the turning point was 2006, right? When Kramnik got destroyed by Deep Fritz. I forget which version of Fritz. Maybe it was Deep Fritz 8, but one of those. And so yeah, the young guys, they do have. Okay, we're all kind of dealing with this challenge because we're still all playing chess, but they're dealing with this unique challenge that the computer has already basically told you the entire truth in the opening, right? It will tell you, if you know everything that the computer says, if you remember all your analysis, then you will get a good position with black in the opening, and everything will be equal, and everything is 0.00 objectively. That's what we understand now. There, as you mentioned, there's no best move. There's a variety of best moves, you could say. Like there's a lot of freedom of choice. But now they have to think, well, everyone knows this stuff, so how do I get ahead of other people? Because I still need to get an advantage. Like it's not enough to just make a draw. So how do I get ahead of my competitors? Which is a really challenging thing. But it's interesting to see how that will develop. As for this candidate was interesting, and the next candidates and the next cycle and like the most important events, it'll be interesting to see how people tackle that challenge.
And actually, Maurice, you wrote about this in your book, in non-traditional training ways. You have a chapter on that. How do you deal with those type of challenges? How do you think in non-traditional and train in non-traditional ways? And how did you see that impact your
this
career?
is the chapter I call disaggregated learning. And I think that one has to always be creative with your training process and try to see the game in fresh new ways. One example of disaggregated learning, or what it is exactly, is the idea that you may train in a way that seemingly has nothing to do with what it is that you're trying to do, or is less related, less practical, if you will. It's kind of like the position I was analyzing with Josh. But nowadays, for example, Chess 960 or freestyle chess or Chess 9LX, whatever they're going to call it these days, that's become a thing, right? And it's even becoming an important thing. And a lot of people might look at it and say, like, well, that's not really related to chess. I like the classical position, and and like that's what I should train. That's the way I should train. But training in this chaotic environment where pieces are all over the place and you can't predict from the opening exactly what moves you should be playing is precisely the kind of thing you should be doing, because it gives you such a fresh perspective on chess. It frees up your brain in a creative way, and you look at the pieces differently. And there are times that we do get jaded as decent players. I don't consider myself a strong player, but just as a certain level, you're like, I've seen this before. I've seen that before. I've seen that before. And then suddenly 960 fresh positions or 959 fresh positions come along, and you go, I ain't never seen that before. This is weird. This is funny how these pieces are in the wrong squares. How do you harmonize? And so to me, things like that, or playing games like shogi, for example, Japanese chess, those have an opportunity to give you a different perspective. Even things like Bug House, that every trainer of young kids would be like, don't play bug house. But even something like that can give you a different perspective on the game and how it functions and what you can do and what you obviously can't do. So to me, you have to engage in this kind of disaggregated learning. Like you break down whatever it is you're doing and just train differently or practice certain things that you normally would think are impractical. It's like Steph Curry dribbling 2 basketballs. Like, why are you dribbling 2 basketballs? You will never have a chance in a basketball game to dribble 2 basketballs. Why would you even practice it? Is it an ego thing? And it's not the thing. It's to develop the kind of amazing coordination and muscle memory that allows you, once you only have 1 basketball, to feel like it could be in either hand and it's not anything to think about. And so these are the kind of varied training methods I think are very useful for people to develop their skills.
And it's also play at the same time.
And it's play, of course.
Play. And by the way, Fabi, you love to play Bughouse. Sometimes I'm like, okay, are we actually playing Bughouse again for like 3 hours? Is that the way we train for this particular game? Or is this really useful? Or is going to create some negative patterns in your mind in preparation for the next game? Which, as a coach, sometimes I'm like, okay, sure, go ahead, play, but you should also keep in mind that maybe you should limit that to a certain degree. At the same time, it's extremely important. Bughouse, Chess 960. You've been playing some Chess 960, Fabi, recently. How do you see the differences between patterns, and how do you adjust your pattern recognition system on the go?
Yeah, well, I think it's important, of course, that if I was, let's say advising the player, don't mess around constantly, right? Don't only be playing Blitz and Bughouse and never working on things that you might, encounter in a real game. Of course, you shouldn't be doing that all the time. But a lot of it, and especially if I were coaching a younger kid, I would definitely recommend that they keep it fun, which is the most important thing, that at least that you're having fun. If you're doing all the, like, let's say I can say all the serious stuff, like you're, analyzing every single variation of the Night Earth, and you're doing all the like really, really important serious stuff, and you're having no fun doing it, then it's probably going to be either a waste of time or bad for your chess, because you're just not going to be enjoying chess. So if you're doing something which you find fun, which is chess related, I really don't see an issue with it, as long as it doesn't take 100% of your time and you're not doing stuff that will also improve your, let's say, understanding of the game. Of course, that's very important, but it doesn't have to be the whole thing. You can still mess around a bit. You can have fun. And when it comes to Fisher Random, I think that, yeah, it is helpful. First of all, because it takes away the crutch, which is that we have all this opening knowledge. And a lot of time we delegate our mental task to the knowledge that we have. We don't even think about the moves we're playing. It's just, okay, I'm making these moves because I know they're correct. So why would I waste time thinking about it? But in Fisher Random, you don't have that. So you're on your own from the very first move, and you have that responsibility. You can't for any second take it easy. While in a classical game, if I play like my first 10 moves, I know, okay, the Berlin and this and that I've seen a million times before, and I know I don't have to think, why is this move good? Because, well, I just know it is, right? And that's also a necessary part of classical chess, that you can't possibly think about every single move in your preparation. Why is it good? Because it will take forever. You just have to kind of trust the computer, and that's practical chess. You trust the computer, then you go to the board, and at some point you start thinking on your own. So in Fisher Random, you can't do that, and it's helpful that you always have your thinking mode on. So you're never relaxed. You're always like, high alert that any move could be a blunder. Any move could be the end of the game, even from the first move. And I saw this sometimes in quite comical ways, and in some of the Fisher Random games, where it's like you make a few moves, you think, okay, whatever, and then you check with the engine after, and it's like, engine says, okay, move 2, white is worse. Move 4, now you're losing. It's like, how is it possible that I made 2 moves, and I saw one game, white made the first move and was worse, according to the engine. Like, how is that even theoretically possible? So yeah, it is useful, and it's also fun, which I think, as I mentioned, is an important part of it.
Would you actually recommend training like that? Let's say you're an aspiring chess player. Would you recommend occasionally taking a break and just going and practicing some chess 960, or finding a friend and playing, forcing yourself to think over the board and play some chess 960? Let's call it chess 960, I guess.
Sure,
For the
why
sake
not?
of it.
Yeah, I would say go for it.
Maurice, how about yourself? You're a
Yeah,
coach
absolutely.
yourself as well. You've been training a couple of up and coming players.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is a fantastic exercise. And you made this point. A lot of people, when they play, they have the moves memorized. They have their opening moves up to a point. But what happens when that new move lands on the board? And we know it happens. So it's going to happen. Let's
It
just put it
happens
that
all
way.
the
It's going to
time.
happen, right? And are you gonna blunder? Are you gonna panic? Are you gonna spend a lot of time on that move because wow, is this a good move? Is this something my opponent has prepared? Like, you go through all the fear check boxes, all the emotional upheaval in that moment, and you just have to be cool. It's like it's just another move on the board, and to be always on that alert. Sooner or later, we're going to see a different move, and things are going to be okay. I'm just going to play chess. That's a huge part of the process. So yeah, I highly recommend it. But there's something that just popped in my head, because there's a chapter I write about on losing, and it was something happened in the candidates that was tailor made for this. Is Gukesh talked about the turning point in the tournament. And I'd love to get your take on this, Fabi. The turning point in the tournament for him, he said, was when he actually lost his game to Ali Racing, right? Like, he felt like this was when he was really upset, but then afterwards he settled himself and he felt like he was playing well and that everything was going to be okay. And he felt more than anything that was the turning point for him. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I talk about losing, and the subtitle, losing, and you will lose, because we all are going to lose games. Losing is such a big part of the learning process, and even a big part of any individual tournament. Like, sometimes you lose a game and people just get derailed. I remember I lost the second game of the tournament that gave me my final GM norm. It was against Greg Shahadi, and it was on my birthday. I had drawn the first game and I lost the second one. And that could have just been devastating and completely derailed my tournament. But it was calming myself down and actually talking to my friend Willie Johnson, who we just had a big talk around everything for those 2 hours. And I got to a place where I was like, you know what? Okay, I just lost that game. And then I went on to win like 5 out of 6 and get my norm with a round to spare, my norm and title with a round to spare. So the reaction to losing is such an integral part of being a professional. But I think a lot of people, when they lose, and I make this final point, Kobe Bryant, who I quote in my book, the late great Kobe Bryant, said that for him, losing is exciting, which nobody would expect him to say. He said losing was exciting because it showed him what to work on. And so I'd love to hear your take on that, Bob.
Yeah, actually, I wasn't too surprised when I heard him say it, because I felt something rather similar. Like, it gave me a bit of deja vu from 2018 when I lost to Karyakin. And of course, I think there's like a little bit of, speaking with hindsight also, when you're the winner of the candidates and it's like everything has gone well and you say, okay, this was the turning point. Of course, things could have gone very differently, right? It might have actually been a really important loss for him. There was that scenario. But when I thought back to 2018, I lost to Karyakin. And of course, it was a very costly loss at the time, when I lost him in the 12th round. And it could have basically meant that I wouldn't win the tournament, even though I was leading before that. But I had noticed that my play leading up to that game had been a little bit, you could call it maybe tight, or you could call it reserved. You could even maybe use a more strong term and say that I was playing in a cowardly fashion. Like, I was trying to keep my lead and protect it, and not playing naturally and, freely, let's say. So I felt like I was a little bit trapped in that, trying to protect my lead. And then after I lost, suddenly I actually had to win. And my play just like vastly improved after that, when I actually had to win. And then I went for it, and I wasn't really thinking, oh no, I can't lose. I have to protect my lead. I can't possibly lose a game and then jeopardize the tournament. Then my play freed up and it got much better. So I thought back on that. I'm not sure if he would say it was like the same feeling um, that he was perhaps not playing well before that. But I did think back to that. It sounded a bit familiar. Although when it comes to these things, of course, it's like, yeah, you don't win the tournament, and then you can't possibly say this, right? It's very much depends on a lot of factors that things actually worked out perfectly for him. Then maybe he looks back on that game. But if it hadn't worked out perfectly, he might look back on that game and think, how could I lose that game? And I could have won it and beat Frusian and potentially won the tournament like that. So yeah, tournaments are also a lot of circumstance, right? It's you never know exactly what will be important. But yeah, sometimes losing can be freeing because you kind of realize that you're there to play for a win. You're not there to not lose, right? You don't win tournaments by not losing games. You win tournaments by winning games.
But see,
And
sorry, you finish.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
No, but I think that's such a big point, and that's why I write about it, because you see it happen at every level. You see, my favorite sport is basketball, and of course, go Knicks. But when you watch these professionals who are making millions of dollars, like millions of dollars, right? And they have to handle losing versus like on a regular basis, whether you're up two and then suddenly you lose two games and now the season or the series is tied, and the attitude that you have to be able to mentally deal with this loss and not feel like you're going to be devastated by the loss. And I think that those who handle those situations best are the ones who end up victorious. And to train yourself, whatever happens, whatever the storyline could have been, to train yourself to accept and even embrace losing. Like just like it happened. It happened. What did I do wrong? What do I need to do differently? And move on from there. And I think that that's one of the hardest lessons of all is losing as a topic and mistakes as a topic, not getting down on yourself, not being sour on yourself, having that Mamba mentality that Kobe had when he said, yeah, losing is exciting. I mean, you don't even expect those words to come out of his mouth. Like, losing is exciting. What do you mean? I remember Irina Krush said to me that somebody told her, celebrate your losses. Celebrate your losses. When I said that to Yasser, he was like, celebrate? Are you crazy? Hate your losses. What are you talking about? Celebrate your losses. But the idea that your losses are your teachers, and the idea that it shows you, you got stuff to work on, and what do you need to do next? How do you overcome this? It's a challenge. And I think that's such a big topic that so many people are derailed when they lose. And yet when you look at Garry Kasparov, I remember when he was so dominant in the 90s, whenever he lost a game, and he did, I really felt sorry for the next person he played. Because Garry never pouted after a loss. I mean, he was stomping mad, like, what? No way. He'd go evaluate, and you just knew he was coming back to crush his opponent the next game. It even happened in his world championship match against Anand. Of course, Anand fell into some theory as well. But he lost game 9, and there went game 10, and he just completely demolished Anand from that moment. After they had drawn 8 games in a row, he loses, and then, boom, he hits him, and then he just keeps hitting him every game. Bam. I think Anand had one draw after that, and everything was just a train running over him from that moment because he didn't handle the losing very well, even though the score was tied. So I think handling losses is such a core part of being a great competitor.
No, I think it's just
absolutely.
Go ahead, Fabio.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we tend to be very results oriented, which is just very natural because we all want to win our tournament or we want to whatever your goal is, right? We mentioned goals before, and some goals are extremely important to us, right? They feel like the world, and when we feel like we're on the cusp of getting them, then it can change how we play, potentially to our detriment. And generally speaking, I know it's like probably either difficult to impossible to achieve this fully, but to be completely like to not even think about the results can also be very useful. To just play as though the previous results didn't matter and the result of the tournament is not life-changing. Just to play as if you're playing any tournament can be extremely useful if you can actually achieve that. And of course, I didn't win the candidate, so I'm not going to say this as like a lesson of how to win a tournament. But when I did lose to Hikaru, my play did improve after that. Because I think that before I lost to Hikaru, I was thinking like, okay, everything's very tight. And we were discussing all these scenarios like, okay, I'm +1, they're +2, and getting to +3, and maybe +3 is enough to win the tournament, maybe it's +4, but you know, and then you go to 50% and everyone's way ahead of you, and you stop thinking about, you're like, okay, my chance of winning the tournament objectively is not very high now, right? So let's not think about that anymore. Let's just think about how to win one game at a time. And after that, my play just like really improved for quite a while, up until the last game, and even
the
for
last
most
game,
of the last
right?
yeah, even for most of the last game until I until I messed it up in a pretty spectacular fashion. But everything I did, mostly from my loss up to the end of the tournament, was like more or less correct. And so that loss, of course, it wasn't good. It was costly in one sense, but if I hadn't lost it, would I have found it within myself to, beat Fallujah, to beat Vidit, to beat Prague? You really don't know. Of course, we can only speculate, but the psychology of it, like the psychology of how you approach losses, of how you approach tournaments in general, of how we tend to, like, another very interesting thing. This is not going to be personal to me. It's just going to be like, for anyone watching, if you witness any match, there's always a very interesting dynamic. If someone loses, they very, very often tend to win on demand. And I'm thinking, like, why is that? Because what are my chances, for example, of beating a 2750 player with black? It's probably not too high. But when that person suddenly feels the pressure of the match weighing on them and the potential match victory, they start to get much worse. And this applies to me as well. I start to play worse if I need a draw. And to other players, I don't even know if it's avoidable, because I see it has happened to Magnus. Like you see Magnus very often losing on demand when he's up in a match.
But it also
does
narrows your options, right? When you're in the position that you have to win on demand, it narrows your option. You know what your goal is. You know what you have to do to get to your desired result. We've seen it recently, for example, with Magnus, right, in Poland. He was 2.5 points behind Wei going in the last round. He knew exactly what he had to do. He had to win pretty much every single game. He said that every single game was the must-win game for him. He couldn't fool around anymore. And most of the top players and the top competitors are taught and know how to achieve that next level when necessary. When they are in that situation, it's a mindset. It's a trained reaction as well, and it's an extremely important factor of a top player, a top competitor.
And the funny thing is that if you try to emulate that at the start of a tournament,
good luck.
Like if you try to just steamroll your opponents at the start, it just doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
But if you do it when you have to, then very often it works.
And the question is, can you get into that mindset on demand? Can you have that nervous energy? And I had to say, I saw that in Kasparov. I saw that in Kasparov. Like every single game he played, you could see his emotions on his face. You could see how desperately he wanted to win that game, and he would just show it. He'd be walking around like a tiger, just prowling, like, and he's just so intently into the game, like everything was on the line for this game. But the thing was that he wanted to win the game. Like that's what his thought was. White, black, he didn't care what color. He always felt like it was critically important that he won that game. He wasn't there to make draws. He wasn't there to be your friend. He wasn't there to micromanage how he was going to win the tournament. He wanted to win +6, +7, +8, +9, whatever the biggest result was. That's what he was in for, to prove that he was the best. And I think that like ultimately that's a different kind of mindset. I was thinking about the flip side of that, which is when you lose, when you think you're going to win because of momentum. And this happens to all of us, that we get better positions that look like this is just such a great position. This is over, and I call it winning in the illusion of momentum. Like I'm just winning, right? And what is the funniest joke to me? You stand outside of a tournament hall Just stand outside and wait, and somebody's gonna walk out. I was winning. Like, yeah, you were, weren't you? It's just a joke. It's just a running joke that we chess players, you were winning, then you relaxed because you thought you were winning, and then the game flipped around, and maybe you didn't even draw the game, maybe you even lost the game. And to keep that mindset, you see it again in sports all the time. A team could be up, basketball team could be up 25 points, and they're like, yeah, whatever. And they start going through the motions. And all of a sudden, the other team with their backs to the wall, they have to do everything they can to come back. This all of a sudden the comeback starts. And then once that tide turns, suddenly that 25-point lead turns into 20, turns to 15, now it's 10. And now they're trying to get back to that same energy that got them the 25-point lead in the first place, and they can't get it back.
There's additional pressure now. There's additional pressure now as well.
Right. Before there was none, you could relax, because we go into the sloth brain. Like, I can relax now. I can chill. It's over. Look at them. We're just overwhelming them. It's so easy. And then, bam. And I mean, I've experienced it. I know you two have experienced it. Definitely. It's just part of the process, and to try to maintain that focus throughout as though it's the same score, right? Or the position is equal, or you're slightly worse, even though you're much better. Because winning a chess game is the hardest part. Actually converting that win is actually the hardest part. And you got to focus, because if you screw up a win, nothing feels worse than screwing up a one position, right? You could lose, but nothing feels worse than, like, I was just completely crushing you, and then I lost the game. Like, that's just the nastiest thing to happen.
But the interesting thing is that it's not the hardest thing in terms of like an objective, for an objective reason, right? It's like the things in chess which are really difficult, we wouldn't say it's like the position I had against Jan. That's not, it's like, okay, that's easy, whatever. But what ends up being difficult is that, as you mentioned, we relax. So it's not because of the position, it's because of our own mentality. And yeah, it's really tough to avoid that relaxation, because you have to avoid it, but it just happens. And you don't know when, right? You might suspect that at some point you might relax. It might have happened a million times before, but you don't know when it'll happen. And then it'll just be something minor, like, okay, this move looks good, and I don't spend the extra like 10 seconds, and I just missed this one detail. Like when it came to my game against Jan, I didn't even feel like I was relaxed, but perhaps I wasn't like fully aware of everything. Like, I wasn't aware of the whole picture in terms of, like, I'm talking about the chessboard. So the move that everyone mentioned, which is that I just play rook d2 and I collect the h2 pawn. Actually, this move just didn't come to mind. So I thought, okay, I'll rook h1, but it looks a bit unclear. And rook t2, like rook to second rank, just didn't even enter my mind. So when everyone mentioned it, I was like, well, I just didn't think about it. It wasn't that if I thought about it and then I rejected it, that would be really weird, right? It just didn't come to mind. So
for me, a much more, let's say, crucial, if you want to call it relaxation, though I don't think there was any relaxation at that point, was when you played bishop h7 instead of bishop c2.
Yeah, I think that was a little bit panicky. I was like down to, I was just like, let's get to time control. And you're absolutely right that I didn't calculate. I just didn't calculate. I just thought, okay, he takes, I'll my king hides somehow. And which is actually correct, but but I shouldn't even be allowing those sorts of things as the game showed. But yeah, at that point I was just not calculating anymore. My calculation was off. It was like 1-2 moves and very, very if someone had just told me like just from the side, like, just focus, maybe this would have woken me up, and I would have like just thought, okay, it's probably the last like few moves of the game if you play them well. But it's very easy to not have that presence of mind when you're in the moment. So it kind of comes back to our like discussion of practical factors. It's really comes down to like your presence at the chessboard. Are you aware of what's going on? Do you have that like understanding, not of just the position, but like, can you look at it from an outside perspective, not like you're there in front of the chessboard, but you're looking from the side when everything just seems so much easier, right? You're looking at a game on the internet, spectating it from the side of the board, it's like, okay, everything's simple. But then you sit in front of it and suddenly your mind gets overwhelmed by a million thoughts and your judgment gets cloudy.
It's a great point, and that I write about that where I say that the coaches always call a timeout when they see it. They see it happening to the team, and they whoa, 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 come over here. Let me talk to y'all. And they scream, "What are you doing? Get back to what we were doing before, right?" But in chess, tennis is similar, right? Although I think they changed some of the coaching rules in tennis.
They're not allowing coaching anymore, right?
But look, we have to do it ourselves. We have to be in the middle of the game. I mean, it has happened to me, of course, enough times for me to be traumatized by it. But I remember one game I had against Robert Byrne, and I'm playing this game, and I'm killing him. I have black. It's 22 moves in, and I'm smoking his king. It's like, this is over. This is done. And I get up, and what do I start thinking about? This game is going to get published in the Informant. Like, I'm not even in the game anymore. You're like, man, this is amazing. This is genius. And a part of it is my own weakness, where I want to show off, right? I want to look good. I want everybody to see, look how smart I am. And I was so into that thought that I'm walking around. My friend Natasha Christensen, Larry Christensen's wife, she saw me, and then there were no engines. In 1988, she was like, "What's the matter? What's up?" I said, "Killing him. This game's gonna get published in the Informant." And she's like, "What?" And she goes to the board. She looks at it. She's like, okay. She goes to sit back down. I go back down, and my very next move tosses the entire advantage. And now I have to fight for the next 30 moves to equalize the position. And then when it's finally equal, I offered him a draw. His own mindset was like, no, I'm beating you. And then he instantly blunders his queen to a 3-move combination. And so it's like, it's got so little to do with the objective truth on the board, although we believe in the objectivity and the best moves. And I know people are watching, and as much as we consult engines to find the best moves, the bottom line is, will this person find this move that they need to find, right? Will they be able to handle it correctly in the moment, under the pressure, when focus is needed, with the lights are bright? That's really where it's at. And to not lose your focus and to always be present and almost coach yourself, that's really one of the hardest things we ever have to do in chess.
Yeah, and I think
it's actually...
Go ahead, Fabio.
Sorry, Christian.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's just great that you brought up the other sports, because chess is sort of unique in that way. It's like, I think the sports that are most comparable to chess are tennis, as you mentioned, and boxing, because these are one-on-ones. But in chess, the clock never stops. While in boxing, you do have those short breaks in between rounds, and in tennis, you do have breaks where perhaps you can't get coached. In boxing, I guess you can, but in tennis, I don't know the rules if you can get any coaching in between. But in chess, it's not only that you can't get coaching, but your time's always running. So you always have to be ready that your opponent will make the next move, and now your time's running, and you actually have to be at the board. So you never really get a break. And it can be very difficult. Maybe you can do self-coaching, as you mentioned, while after you make a move and in between moves. But you really never get a break from the game. You never get to kind of step outside yourself and just view it as a neutral third party. You're always kind of in it, and it never stops. So if the tension is building, chess can be kind of unique in that way, that you don't really get a break from the tension, from the stress of the game.
So, what I used to do is, when I realized, I realized it, and it was, what do you do about it? But when I started studying Aikido, martial arts, we would do meditation. And meditation was really a simple process. It was just breath meditation, right? You count your breaths. In for 4, out for 4, or in for 8, out for 8, as long as you could tolerate, and try to clear your mind. And it's very hard to clear your mind. When you start meditating, you realize it's extremely hard to not think about the thing you're not supposed to be thinking about. But the thing was to give yourself grace. And what that meant was that if something came in your mind and you realize, why am I thinking about that? To not feel like, oh, you're such an idiot for thinking about that. Because that's what the mind does. The mind just starts wandering. So what you'd have to do is like, okay, I was thinking about that. Now let's get back to breathing. And you got back to breathing. So what I found when I was playing was so incredibly useful was that while I was walking around or trying to think about chess, and then something else came in my mind, then I would notice that it had come in my mind because I had trained for that. And I would notice, oh, this other thought is there. I said, okay, that's got to go. Let's get back to just focusing on the breath. And that constant return to self-awareness, to where the center is, and to doing something relaxing, very specific to calming your mind, was incredibly useful. I'm having a flashback now to it happening during a game I beat Larry Christensen in where was it? I think it wasn't in Foxwoods. No, I think it was I don't even remember the tournament. It was Chicago Open. But at any rate, I remember beating him this game, and it was the exact same thing I did, where I was in the middle of the game and I started thinking about some random stuff, and then I just went, wait, calm yourself, get back to the board, get back to thinking not about the position, but just calming my mind, and that was extremely effective. And I think that that's something when you have to coach yourself, you have to find your way of doing it.
I feel like I've learned so many things and so many techniques to deal with competition, and you've written about it in your book. Now you also told us what was the most difficult moment in this process was reframing your mind. What was the best moment in this process of writing this book?
Finishing. Finally getting to the end. One part about the book that was important that I actually, it's in a few parts, was talking about the way chess helped me with my family, particularly my mom and my dad. In terms of my mother, there was a time when I was really resentful of the fact that she had left the three of us, me and my two siblings, in Jamaica for the 10 years that she did. And I never really understood why she did that. I knew why she did it, but internally you feel abandoned, right? And there was some resentment. And it was only after I had my own child that I should say after I had my own child, I felt the resentment the most. Like it flared up. I had it as a young boy, but it flared up as a grown man with his own child, that how could you leave a baby? How do you do that? And I confronted her, called her on the phone and asked her how she could possibly do something like that. And, she was upset hearing the question, and she took a deep breath and she explained just how painful it was for her to do. And how much of a sense of loss it was for her that she wasn't able to spend those beautiful moments of her children growing up and changing into real people, far away in a land far away. And when she said that, I mean, we were both to the point of tears. When she said that, I was like, damn, I was so damn self-pitying that I couldn't understand the pain this woman had gone through as a parent, having to leave her children behind. And so I talk about that from the perspective of looking backwards. Like, you understand things only when the future has made you come to that realization, not your present. Your present can sometimes cloud you, and it's the future that will tell you about the present situation. So that was an important thing to let go for me. Another thing was my dad, who was in and out of our lives, so to speak. He actually was around, but we would not see him regularly. And then he actually left and went to France when I was a teenager. And then we definitely didn't see him regularly after that. And I always felt, again, a little bit of resentment and self-pity that I didn't have my dad around in critical years. At that point, what I would call critical years. And same thing. I had a good relationship with him. So I said, how'd you do something like that? And it, it felt really bad for me to not have my dad around. And he pushed back and he said, he was around for how he could be around because they weren't together, right? So he couldn't be around all the time. And he would have us come over on the weekends and he'd cook us a dinner or bake some banana bread. And then we would play cards. We played dominoes. And he was a great card player and domino player, games player. He played those games like we play chess. Like he'd know everybody's hand at the end and he would break it down at the end, like, okay, you have this, you have this, you have this. But like, how did the guy memorize all that? If he was following all the cards that were played and down to the end, it's like he was counting cards or counting dominoes. Like he could just do that. And I never credited him with any of my success, like just never. And it's only from talking to him and understanding his point of view that I was able to, as a man, be like, wow, how come I didn't give this guy any credit for the things that he did to try to help us as we grew? And I think that comes from I write about it, the view from the other side of the board, that we're so often into what we think that we don't think about what the opponent thinks or what the other person is thinking. And yet in chess, we do it all the time. If you get strong enough, you definitely do it like 100% of the time. What are they thinking about? What are they going to do? Although maybe in your case, Fabi, when you played Bishop 8-7, if you have been deeply into what Jan was thinking desperately, you might have realized he's going to sack an exchange and might have more chances than you should give him. But that's really what our art is, right? Our art is thinking about the other person and making sure that we don't give them everything they want because we're inside their heads. And so being able to release a few of those things in this book was big for me, at least in a more public way, to talk about it and showing just how the chess process has helped me to navigate my life in very personal ways.
Maurice, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Where can people find the book?
The book's everywhere. Books, Amazon. You can go Barnes and Noble. You can you'll find it pretty easily.
We'll leave a lot of links in the description. Thank you very much, Maurice, for joining us. I know you're a busy man. Tomorrow you have a flight. You're going to Barcelona, I believe, to do some more content. I don't want to keep you for too long. It's pretty late where you are right now. So thank you very much for sharing these lessons with us, with the audience. And hopefully we'll have you for round 3 soon.
I appreciate it. I always appreciate talking with you both. Obviously, we're good friends, and it's always nice to have a forum like this one to share thoughts. So thanks again for having me on the show.
Thank you, Maurice.
Cheers, guys.